All right. So, hello and welcome to all of the 7th and 8th grade students at St. George School in Maine to this very special Zoom meeting with Holocaust survivor David Lenga. In particular, I would like to acknowledge and thank your fabulous teachers, Miss Lisa Boggs and Mr. Joshua McPhail, and also today we have Mrs. Shamanska helping us, for working with us to coordinate this program. And thank you also to the administration. Samuels. I am Director for Museum Volunteer Services at the Museum of Tolerance, and I have the privilege of working closely with our Holocaust survivors. The Museum of Tolerance is the educational arm of the National Human Rights Organization dedicated to remembering the Holocaust and promoting tolerance and respect for the human dignity of all people. Simon Wiesenthal was a Holocaust survivor who fortunately survived 5 Nazi concentration camps, but he lost 89 members of his personal family. After the war, he dedicated his life to bringing to justice the Nazi perpetrators of the Holocaust. Simon Wiesenthal inspires lives when people remember, end quote. Well, today we remember that 83 years ago, on November 9th and 10th, 1938, the Nazi regime perpetrated Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, a state-sponsored pogrom or attack on the Jews and their property in Germany that left 1,000 synagogues burned, 91 Jews dead, 30,000 Jewish men arrested and sent to concentration camps, and the destruction and desecration and cemeteries. The Nazi government forced the Jewish community to clean up the broken glass and destroyed property. And took 1 billion Reichsmarks, the equivalent of $400 million in 1938. And what still stood by and did nothing to try to stop the fires or the destruction. That's an important lesson for us. I want to share there are 4 roles that people can play. The person doing harm, the target victim, the person who is harmed, the bystander, the person who stands by and does nothing, or the ally, the person who tries to help. We must always strive to be that ally. And let's keep these roles in mind as we meet our esteemed Holocaust survivor, David Lenga. Remember that David was only a few years older than you are today when he lived through and survived the Holocaust. It is now my pleasure and privilege.
Thank you so very much. And welcome students to this event. I'm so honored to be part of this dialogue and to impart on you the experiences that I have experienced during the war. The Holocaust for many people today is just a word that so many do not comprehend. And it is a fact of life that unless you understand the meaning of the Holocaust and you understand its consequences for humanity at large, not just for a certain segment of the population, then history will repeat itself. And we will relive horrors that should never happen in the first place among people. And so what I have to tell you is that I would like you to closely listen to what I have to say, because I survived the Holocaust, as Yelena said, but I survived it by the skin of my teeth. And what I witnessed as a young child, at 11 years of age, when the war broke out in 1939, was beyond description. It was a horror inflicted upon the Jewish community in particular, of the entire Europe, actually. And it was an outrage. It was premeditated. It was planned. It did not happen overnight. Because people let it happen. They were standing by, watching in deaf silence how Hitler perpetrated the crimes against the Jewish people and against humanity. And this is the subject that we will be very young children need to understand it in terms that you can understand at that age. And I will try to make it as clear as I can for you to do just that, understand the severity. And I would like to frame the discussion, if I may, in terms of why do you, as young students, think about the Holocaust? And what would impel you to really take seriously the lessons to be learned from it? And with this, I will open. Thank you so much.
Come up closer if you want, or you can sit in your seat. It's up to you.
Hello. So one of my questions was, since we saw your other that you had two friends when you escaped, I was just wondering how long you knew them for a long time, if you kept in touch.
I did not quite hear what was said. Could the teacher please repeat the question?
That there were two friends that were with you in the camps, and did you stay in touch with them?
Okay, so my two friends survived with me the Holocaust. We had basically the same experiences, but after the war ended, we found ourselves in the state of Sweden. After the war, we were taken in there for rehabilitation. I was together with them for a while, but then, of course, each of us found our ways into society, Swedish society at that time, on separate ways, and we have over time lost touch, because I understand that one of them went back to his native Belarus, where he was born. The other one went to Canada, and I remained in Sweden, so we kind of lost touch with each other.
Yeah.
All right, Zoe, nice and loud.
My question was, were you scared? And if
Was I scared? Was that the question? I was intensely scared. I was petrified. I was beyond scared because what I have witnessed was unprecedented. We have no idea that we can even dream of some horror like this to become a reality. It was beyond being scared. Hanging literally on a thread every single moment of my waking day during 6 years of incredible horror that I was subjected to.
thank you.
Okay. Did you ever think about finding your brother when you left?
I never believed, and I still don't, that my brother survived because I have seen with my own eyes how he was separated from me forcefully, taken away from me and from my mom. And he was 10 years old when that happened in the large ghetto. And he was taken along with all those that were considered undesirable. They were considered not able-bodied anymore. In other words, they were not productive enough for the Nazis to be kept alive. And so they were actually burned in Treblinka, Majdanek, and other infamous concentration camps in crematoria. So I know that he did not survive the war. Neither did my mom.
What was the scariest part of it all?
What was the scariest part of it all? The scariest part was when we were suddenly attacked. In September the 1st, 1939, I was in a streetcar at that time for going an errand for my mom. And everything came to a screeching halt when the sirens of the city started blaring. And we were attacked by an armada of German attack planes descending upon the civilian population and machine gunning indiscriminately into the crowd. And within moments, I have seen a river of blood on the street and body parts flying every which way and people in total panic, including myself, looking for shelter from the bullets above. That was the scariest moment, one of the scariest moments that I've experienced. And I was only 11 years old. And that moment is unforgettable. That moment left a scar on my soul, on my heart, on my conscience. And I've been bearing that scar and I'm living with it.
How did it feel when you went back to the old concentration camp after so many years?
That was a very seminal moment in my life because when the war ended, I had an opportunity to return back to Poland, to the place where I was born. And so many other people from other nationalities did the same. Many others chose not to. I was one of those that made the decision, conscious decision, not ever to step over the threshold of Poland again. Because when I left Poland and was taken to Auschwitz, when I left Poland, I left behind ashes of all that I ever held dear, of all that I ever cherished, of all the people that I ever loved, of everything that I considered as our possession. Everything was in ashes. It was burned, it was looted, it was destroyed. And I had nothing to return back to. So I made a vow at that time that as long as I live, I will not step over the threshold of Poland again innocent blood, and it only evokes horrendous memories that I'd much rather try to put under the rug and not carry with me the rest of my life. I didn't want to reawaken the wounds that I suffered in Poland.
Could you read it? The last one, the first one.
What was your mindset when you were escaping from one of the concentration camps?
Okay, so the question was, what was my mind?
What was your mindset when you were escaping one of the concentration camps?
When I was escaping?
Well, like, yeah, escaping, fleeing.
I never escaped the concentration camp. I surreptitiously found my way out of Auschwitz, which was, of course, the very infamous concentration camp and annihilation camp. That is, I am recounting that incident in my memoir, and it was a decision that I made on the spot to save my life and get out of this hell. And I figured that any other place on earth may not be as hellish as Auschwitz was. And I was very determined to get out. So after 3 days in Auschwitz, I found a very surreptitious way to find my way out by sneaking into an area of people that were selected to go to Germany as workers, of course, as tradesmen. I was not selected, but I found my way in anyway, in a very sneaky way, if you will, because I wanted to save my life. And so that is how I was taken away from Auschwitz and taken to Germany proper for slave labor, where I spent the rest of the war. And I escaped that way. It is kind of an escape, but it is not the kind of escape that you would normally think people escaping from jail or something like that. Nothing like that. It was just done by being cunning, being street smart, and taking advantage of a moment that I was able to do. And that is how I escaped Auschwitz. Yeah, but I was still a prisoner of the Nazis. I was still subjected to slave labor in Germany, very hard slave labor, to disease, to epidemics, to starvation, and to all the other horrors that they inflicted upon the Jewish people.
Carly wants
Mr.
to know,
Lenga,
did you know what was happening in the world outside of the camps? For example, did you know the Allies were on their way?
Okay, so this is a very actually important question. The German policy was to keep all the inmates and all the Jews in total darkness when it comes to news. We were not allowed from the very outset, as soon as they entered Poland, they prohibited Jews from owning a radio or a newspaper or any source of news for that matter. And if anyone was caught having such a device, in spite of the edicts, they were executed. So by the punishment of death, we were prohibited from owning those things. So consequently, there was a total blackout throughout 6 years of war, whether we were in the ghetto in Lodz, whether we were in Auschwitz, whether we were in concentration camp in Dachau and in Kaufering in Germany proper. We were totally kept in the dark of what is happening all around us. So we had no idea what is going on. And that was a deliberate policy on their part.
Kale has a question. Oh, I gotta turn on the mic.
It is on.
Is the mic on?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Okay, Kale wants to know. We got him. Did you think you would survive, or did you think you were going to die?
I was very skeptical very disbelieving that I will survive this war. Because people that were subjected to the same starvation and to the same slave labor and to the same horrors that I was, did not survive. And they were dying like flies all around me. I have witnessed small children, very few of them that remained, but those that did, they were laying on the sidewalks with swollen bellies, dying, literally dying of starvation. I have witnessed corpses being loaded up on carts, driven not by horses, but by other humans, by other prisoners in the ghetto, and taking those corpses outside of the ghetto's walls into pits that were dug out by the Jews themselves. They were forced to do it, and the bodies were dumped in there and burned. And I have witnessed this on a daily basis. Starvation was one of the greatest weapons that the Nazis used to annihilate the Jewish people. I was subjected to that. I survived the war by the skin of my teeth, as I said, and by sheer luck. I cannot attribute it to my cunning. I cannot attribute it to my wits. I cannot attribute it to my superior knowledge or ability. It was sheer luck, because my life was hanging on a thread all along, and I could have been dead any moment.
Mr. Lenga, Mr. McPhail, we had a question from Peyton. How were you able to find the resiliency and courage to survive each day?
Well, that is a very important question, but also a very difficult one to answer, because I had no magic formula for survival. I was struggling every day to survive the next moment. I had a will to survive because I was always hoping. I was optimistic by nature, I guess. Maybe I inherited it from my parents, I don't know. But my personality was such that I was looking for ways of how to survive. I was a tailor by profession at a very early age. I acquired my skill in the ghetto in Lodz. And as a tailor, I was able to provide services to those that were the higher ups, if you will, the capos in the camps, and those that were having authority over us. I was able to provide services to them by sewing mittens in the bitter winter cold, which they needed badly, by sewing them vests and any kind of pieces of clothing, socks, so that they shouldn't get frostbites. And they were equally deprived of those things. So they provided me in the camps with material, with military blankets. They were very thin military blankets, but very tightly woven. And they let me stay in the barracks to do those things for them. And by so doing, I was spared of going to the work gangs in the harshest winter times. And in that sense, it saved my life. They also gave me a little bigger rations of food as a grateful gesture for what I did for them. So I used my skill as a tailor to survive this horrendous time. This is a condition that didn't happen every single day, but it happened for prolonged periods of time while I was in a concentration camp. And it enabled me to survive on a daily basis. The other people that did not have that opportunity or that skill did not survive. And when we were going to sleep each night after a harsh workday, into the barracks, into those bunks that we were shoved into like sardines, people to the right of me, people to the left of me said good night. We tried to get some sleep, but when I woke up, I was the only one that was alive. The one to the left, the one to the right were dead. That repeated itself so many times. And I was a kid. I was 15 or 16 years old when that happened. And I, for some reason, felt that if I can just make it the next day and the next day and the next day, maybe one day, things will change. The Germans will have a great defeat and we will be liberated at last. But this was a fantasy that I had. I had no assurance from anyone that this is what's going to happen. And so I lived from moment to moment and tried to survive.
We had another question from Carter about your story about the potatoes and going out to get the potatoes and the guard catching you, and just what was going through your mind then, and also now, many, many years later, thinking about that.
Well, I've been reflecting with that moment in my life so many times. I wrote it in my book, and actually the title of my book was The Compassion of a Deadly Enemy, and that referred to that moment. That was a very important moment in my life that really saved my life for that time being. I was a kid. It was in the ghetto. It was in 1942 or 43. I couldn't have been more than like 15 years old at most. And I decided to take the life in my own hands by securing some potatoes and some vegetables that were just right outside of the ghetto walls. All I had to do was just reach for it, and it was mine. And that would have saved me and my aunt and her son that I lived together with, and would save us from sure starvation. I took that chance in the middle of the night to go to that field that was owned by Polish peasants, Polish farmers. They were working the fields and growing a lot of vegetables and potatoes there. It was visible to the eye. It was just above ground. We could just pick them up and take it away. And I dug enough of a hole in the tilled ground that was soft. I was emaciated, I was small, I was thin, and I found my way through the barbed wires underneath. And I was in the field, and that was in the dead of night. It was pitch dark. And I took advantage of that darkness, I thought. And so with the burlap sack that I had taken with me, I filled the potatoes. I had them almost half full, and I was ready to leave before anything happens. And before all that happened, the reflector came upon me from above of the tower. The soldier that was guarding the tower came with a machine gun and pointed it at my head. And I was totally petrified. And I thought for sure that this is the end of me. I for sure thought that he's going to shoot me, he's going to kill me, and that was the end of that. And I looked at this man at that moment. He was an older man. He was a German. He could have been my grandfather. And the reason they employed older men as guards of the ghettos is because the younger Germans were taken to the front in Russia. And so they enlisted older, retired Germans to be guards. And this is one of those men from the Wehrmacht, the German army, the regular army. And he was the one that I confronted, or he confronted me. And I pleaded with him to please don't kill me, don't shoot me. I am trying to save my life and the life of my parents, I told him. They're starving, all of us are starving. Would you please just let me leave in peace and not kill me? And then I even pleaded with him. And I said, sir, maybe you have a grandson my age. Think about that. I said, please just let me go with the potatoes to save our lives. And at that moment, to my total astonishment, he lowered the rifle, he turned off the reflector, and he says to me in German, I spoke a good German at the time, he says to me in German, verflucht nochmal, mach mal, dass du loskommst. God damn it, get the hell out of here. Make sure you get out of here. I don't want to ever see your face again. If I do, I'll shoot you on the spot. And he actually let me go with my potatoes. For weeks in the ghetto. That was one incident that stands out in my life because it literally saved my life. Now, whether it was an angel hovering over me, I don't know. That one moment, a guilt pang, maybe, whatever it was that motivated him to do this, I will never quite know, but it happened. And it happened to me. And this is a moment that I can.
Mr. Lenga, can you share with us how it feels to you when you hear people making fun of the Holocaust or the Nazis and, you know, belittling it or just treating it as a joke?
That is a very profound question, and this is what I really like to answer, because it touches me personally. I have personally not encountered anyone, such person, that is trivializing or I've heard many instances of such things that happen, and particularly among young people that don't quite understand the ramifications of the Holocaust. They seem to take it maybe lightly, or maybe they think that the whole thing is a joke, or maybe they are not aware of the severity of the Holocaust or not educated enough about it. To them that do those things, I would like to address myself. And I would like to tell you a joke. The Holocaust was a premeditated murder of 6 million innocent Jewish people, 6 million innocent souls, men, women, and children. That they have committed was being Jewish. To single out a group or a people for their difference, for their deep, for the way they look, or for the way they appear, or for racial nefarious theories, deeds, and I'm talking about the Nazis now. This is not only outrageous, but it is something that has to be studied, something that has to be spoken about, something that has to be watched for, and be very aware that something like that should never ever happen again to human beings. You young people need to understand that the Holocaust was not happening overnight. It didn't fall down from the sky. It's not something that was a surprise happening. It was planned. It was executed. It was meticulously implemented over many years and over different stages. Hitler knew exactly what he wants to do with the Jews. That was his policy. He declared the war, a deadly war against the Jews, alongside the war that he was carrying on with the Allies. The Jews suffered because in their incredible, twisted minds, the Jews do not deserve to live because they do not like they're not Aryans. They do not have blonde hair and blue eyes, and they do not comport with their idea, with the Nazi idea of what a proper and they consider themselves to be a master race. That means that only their race, only their German blue-eyed prosper and to live and to have their sway over everybody else that does not look like them. This is what young people don't understand. This is something that you need to understand. So making jokes about the Holocaust is the worst thing. And Hitler was the greatest murderer that history has ever known. Definite silence when he committed that murder, because people chose to be bystanders. They were apathetic. They did not take action. And because of this apathy and indifference is what the Holocaust was enabled to do what they did. The rest, of course, is all history, and we all know what happens. But please, please, in your discourse among yourselves, as you are growing up, as you become adults, as your mind starts comprehending more of the severity of the subject, please do not make jokes about the Holocaust. Please do not think that this can be taken lightly. This is not something that can be taken lightly. This is something that has to be respected, something that has to be learned from. The Holocaust is a historical event that we must be keenly aware of and live our lives to the best of our ability to be the opposite of what Nazism is preaching. We need to have loving kindness in our hearts. We need to be kind to one another. We need to understand and accept one another, no matter what the differences are. We are all human beings. If one's skin is cut, then the blood is just as red as the other person. We live on the same planet. We die the same death. We live the same lives. And we have the same needs. And we are one people on this earth. And this is the philosophy that you need to adopt in your own lives. And this is the way of principled life that you need to lead. And please, again, do not minimize, trivialize the Holocaust. Thank you.
What was your life like before the war started?
Oh my God. You know, I had a wonderful, wonderful childhood as far as all the way when I was very, very, very little. I remember that. I was born into a very wonderful family, a very deeply religious Jewish family. We were what we consider middle class. I was fortunate. My father was a manufacturer. We had a tannery, and we were quite well to do. And because of this, you know, I had a pretty good life. I had a lot of friends growing up. I was well educated. My parents made sure that I get a good education. I was going first to public school as I was of age, and then after that I was going to religious school. And so I learned about the Bible, I learned about our heritage, I learned about a lot of things that a young person should be aware of. I was a very good student, and I had wonderful friends, and I had the need, evidently, most of my young life to associate with others, friends that were older than me. And when my mom says, why don't you stick to your friends your own age? And I said, from my own age, I can learn nothing, but from the older ones, I can learn a lot. And so my mom smiled and agreed with me. And so I was always a curious boy. I was a very good student in school. Unfortunately, all I managed to do is to be educated up to the 5th grade. I graduated the 5th grade in 1939, before the war broke out. And I was reciting the school poem for the class. I was always chosen to the choir because I had a pretty good voice. And I was an outgoing, extroverted boy that really enjoyed the friendships of many like-minded friends. And so I had a very good life. And my brother and I, we were thriving in this environment. I loved my brother. He was 4 years younger than me. He was always, I always considered him even smarter than me because he had such a great brain that we all admire. He was a wonderful young child. And I would give my life for him because I just loved him so much, with just the two of us. But then in 1939, September the 1st, everything came to a total abrupt end. And all that I've ever known that was good turned to ashes. Once the Nazis invaded Poland, everything became a nightmare. And then I lived that nightmare for 6 years.
How do you feel when you look back at it from where you are now?
I have been doing an awful lot of a reflection of my life. I have looked back at my childhood with very fond memories, and those memories kept me optimistic. They kept me warm at heart. So I enjoyed the memories of those times. But the memories of the horrors during war were something that I had to deal with. After the war, there was a lot of trauma, some of it overtly expressed. A lot of people that were survivors, my friends, they could not express. So they hid it within their soul. And they became very, very traumatized because of this. Many of them were looking for professional help to deal with the trauma. I was a very fortunate person. Myself at a very early age, at the age of 18. And I was telling myself, if I want to go on with my life, and I still have my life ahead of me, actually, I was only 18. I said to myself, if I want to go on with my life in a meaningful way, I cannot allow my horrendous past to dictate my future. I didn't want my future to be determined by the burden of the Holocaust. And so I was able, maybe with some difficulty, to put it, as it were, under the rug. Not to forget it. This you cannot do. But to put it asleep, if you will, and to take on my life. I fell down, I got bruised, I got up, I dusted myself off, and I moved onward and forward. And the concrete ways in which I did that was to fall in love at an early age with a beautiful young woman that was also a Holocaust survivor from Czechoslovakia, my wife. She became a wife very shortly after that. And we formed a family. And I try to replenish what I lost, at least to some degree. And I was successful in the sense that I've created a wonderful family of 3 daughters over time. And I have now 7 grandchildren that are adults, and I have 7 great-grandchildren that are very small. I'm thriving in my family. I'm thriving in the success that I've built after the war. I enhanced my skills from being a tailor to being a designer. I worked for the movie industry in Hollywood, creating wonderful costumes over a long period of time. I was traveling widely, got in contact with important people, and built a life, a meaningful life of my own. Today, I'm 94 years old pretty soon, in a few more weeks. And I am looking back at my life, and I am proud of what I did, of what I've accomplished. And the horrors that I experienced as a very young boy are haunting me to the extent that whenever I speak about it, whenever I am in touch with people that are suffering from it, it all brings back those memories. So it is a burden, but it is a burden that I'm able to bear because I assigned it a place into my past. And so I'm grateful to God that I'm here still able to talk to you and share my experiences.
I'm wondering, some of the things that came up, is that my time? Yeah. About the people that helped you and the people that stood by, did nothing and let it happen. And I'm wondering if you can connect that to the experience of these students and, you know, what role they can play when they hear people putting down members of a certain group or making fun of members of a certain group.
Okay, I think I've understood the questions. My message to the students of today is very clear. When you learn the lessons of history, of the Holocaust in particular, when you learn what leads up to it, when you learn what indifference and apathy can do, the consequences of it, then you have a much wider perspective, a much better understanding of the nefariousness of these thoughts, these developments. And because of this, you need to make sure that you yourself adopt principles of life which are totally in contrast to those horrible thoughts of Nazism. You need to be good people. You need to adopt principles of equality, principles of loving kindness, principles of acceptance of one another, principles of considering every human being a worthy human being to live side by side with you. You need to go on in life and be creative, to contribute to society, to be good members of society, to reject nefarious conspiracy theories. Be aware, first and foremost. Be aware, be mindful of the forces that are against you. And one of the things that you are exposed to that I have not been to when I was your age was the internet. And the internet is a double-edged sword. The internet is comparable to a knife. The famous Rabbi Rambam in the 12th century said that a knife is a neutral instrument. In the hands of a killer, It's a mighty weapon. In the hands of a surgeon, it can save precious lives. So how do you use that knife? Do you use it for the good, or do you use it for the bad? The Facebook, the YouTube, the TikTok, all the other social media have great influences on your minds. They are trying to persuade you to think their way. You hear a lot of horrible stories and a lot of bitterness and a lot of anger and a lot of anti-Semitism being spewed forth on those social media. They try to sway you to their side. You must not ever be swayed in that direction. You must recognize how evil this is, because where it leads to a catastrophe. And even if it starts with a certain group, even if it starts with the Jews, it never, never ends with the Jews. Because like a terrible virus, it starts affecting everybody. There is no discrimination here. The famous Lutheran pastor that lived in the Holocaust, during the Holocaust in Germany, he famously said in his book, because he was against Hitler's philosophy, he was actually working against Hitlerism and social nationalism. He was thrown into jail, not jail, concentration camps actually, even though he was a German, a real German, a pastor, a Lutheran pastor, because he was opposing Hitler's views. He was thrown into concentration camp. After the war, when he survived, he wrote a book. And he said famously in this book, he said, when they first came for the socialists, I did not speak up because I was not a socialist. And then they came from the labor unionists. Well, I was not a labor unionist, so I didn't speak up. And then they came for the Jews. Well, I was not a Jew, so I didn't speak up. But then they came for me. And at that time, there was no one to take up my cause and stand up for me. These are very, very, very deeply felt thoughts and words. And we need really to take it to heart. In essence, what it means is when persecution or any kind of persecution of a people, whether it be Jewish or gypsies or gays or whatever, any group that is being persecuted and being denigrated, that group is just the beginning of what can happen to a larger society, because it never stops. It just proliferates like a deadly virus. We have to watch out for those things. We have to be aware of those things. And as you grow up and you become more aware of things, you have to recognize it. And the most important thing, do not be a bystander. Be an activist. Stand against hate. Stand against denigration. Stand against trivializing the Holocaust. Stand against those forces that would subvert our way of life that we cherish so much.
Meg has a question.
Sasha can go first. You can go. But I'm going.
How did you feel when the war finally ended?
Oh, that is a feeling that is kind of a little bit difficult to convey, because the exhilaration is just beyond comprehension. When the war ended, I was on a farm, on a German farm. I found myself there because our transport was bombarded from the air. We were dispersed, and the Germans left us, the guards, overnight. and we found ourselves like sheep without a shepherd, and we were wandering in the countryside, and I found myself on a farm. And the farmer took us in. We were 3 boys, me and my 2 friends. They took us in. We didn't know that the war is at an end, but it was coming to a close. And so anyway, we found ourselves on this farm, and on this farm we stayed several days. They treated us very well, too well actually, too well because we were not used to this kind of human treatment. They gave us adequate food, they gave us clothing, they gave us showers, they gave us ability to sleep in a decent bed with a pillow. I mean, we were just not used over these years to be treated like human beings, and they did. And so after the 3rd or 4th day, the American forces came to the farm and with tanks and jeeps, and they surrounded the area and they liberated us. And when I was in the outhouse at that moment, and my 2 friends were outside and they were yelling at me, David, come out. We are liberated. And I couldn't understand the word, the meaning just sounded so strange, liberated. So I came out and I saw American soldiers, tanks that were not like German tanks, they were just very different. And everybody was like trying to get in touch with us, the soldiers. And there were a whole brigade of black soldiers, black American soldiers. And by that, up to that point, I got to tell you the truth, up to that point, I never met a black person in person. Never met one, because in Europe, there were very few of them to be seen. They just weren't there. And so when I saw this, how friendly they were, how outgoing, they tried to communicate with us, and they couldn't because they spoke English, only English. None of them was bilingual, and we did not speak English. And so we had a very difficult time communicating. We tried with our hands, with our feet, with our fingers, to communicate somehow, but it was so frustrating. And then in the middle of all this frustration, a very tall, slanky white officer with a lot of medals on him comes right towards us 3 boys. And he says to us in unadulterated Yiddish language, he says to us, "Ihr Jünger, ihr seid Jiden." In Yiddish, he said it to us. And that means, you boys, are you Jews? And I looked at him in total amazement, and I says, oh my God, he speaks Yiddish. I says, now I can communicate. And so of course we are Jewish. And then he says to us, you do not have to be here anymore another second. I'm taking you with me. The war is over. Germany capitulated. You are free people from here on. We are taking you to a displaced persons camp in the American zone in Germany. There you will be cared for. You'll be taken care of. You will have adequate food and medical attention, and you are free people. And so that is how the war ended for me. The exhilaration is beyond description. I can still savor it.
Unbelievable.
It was a moment of great joy.
Absolutely. I think sadly our time has come to an end. David, I want to say such a sincere thank you to you for sharing your questions, your answers, your heart, your wisdom with all of us today. I want to commend the students of St. George. You asked sensitive, important, thought-provoking questions. And I hope that you were inspired by the words and the wisdom of Mr. Lenga today. As we end, again, I want to thank the teachers for facilitating this. The Museum of Tolerance is so proud to be able to reach beyond our walls and to be able to travel to Maine and to spend this time with you. I would like to end with a quote from Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel, an important Holocaust survivor, wrote the book Night. I do hope that you will have the opportunity to read it, to assimilate his story, and to learn from what he has to share. And he empowers us with his quote, "I fervently believe that to listen to a witness is to become a witness." All of you today are now witnesses from Mr. David Lenga. This is the last generation. You are the last generation that will have the privilege of being able to meet and speak to Holocaust survivors. Learn well what they have to say. And as David challenges us, his quote in our museum says, "Know the brutal history of the Holocaust and the danger to all humanity. Stand up to evil. The danger lies in apathy and indifference." Mr. Lenga told us, don't be that bystander. Clearly, we don't want you to be that perpetrator. And we never want you to be that target or victim that somebody is choosing to discriminate against you. Be that ally, be that upstander. And together we can build a better world. Thank you for joining us today at the Museum of Tolerance. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us.
Thank
you. Yes.
Thank you.
If your questions didn't get asked, Mr. Michelle can email them directly to Mr. Longa. Hold on. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry if we didn't get to all the rest of the questions. They were great questions,
Yes, they were.
really excellent. And David, your answers were so sensitive
Thank you.
and so thought-provoking. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lenga.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Have a nice day.
Thank you so much.